Caleb climbed to the top of a rocky hill and held up his phone so Wilson could see out of the camera. "The satellite is on that ridge," Wilson said, circling a point on the mountain about 3 miles inland. It was at least an hour hike on a straight trail, let alone through the thick underbrush. "Head north, but stay alert." "Why?" asked Caleb. "Bears," Wilson replied. "You have a strange sense of humor," Caleb said as he followed Wilson's directions. "I will take that as a compliment. Humor is one of the most difficult things for an AI to do. I get the feeling you don't find me very entertaining, though." "I'm not a fan of AI," said Caleb. "Why not?" "My dad researches AI for a company in Silicon Valley. We don't get along very well." Wilson considered this, or perhaps Caleb's phone just wasn't powerful enough to run him smoothly. "That doesn't seem logical," Wilson finally said. "Why does your relationship with your father affect your opinion of me?" "Shouldn't you be in low power mode?" Caleb asked. "Okay," replied Wilson. "Just keep going north. I'll check back in periodically." By the time Sasha returned to the beach, the fog had dispersed, and the sun was finally starting to punch through the blanket of clouds. Sasha had dragged the boat far enough up the sand to see that the motor had been submerged overnight. But the real problem was the hull. It had several small cracks in the fiberglass where the boat had struck the rocks. It wasn't going anywhere without a lot of work. Sasha held the phone up to show Wilson the damage. "I'm sorry," he said. "Structural analysis is very complex. Even with unlimited processing power, it would be impossible to tell you the best course of action based on images alone." "Then what can you do?" Sasha asked. "I still have access to data about the island, particularly seismic and topographical. I can also help you navigate the nearby waterways and coordinate a rescue plan once Caleb fixes the satellite." The boat had a small metal toolbox, but all that was inside was a hammer, a few screwdrivers, and a roll of duct tape that was almost empty. Sasha looked around the beach for anything that might be useful, but found nothing but rocks and pine trees. Sasha tried to start the motor, but no matter how hard she tugged on the pull cord, it wouldn't turn over. She pulled off the plastic cover and saw that the inside was filled with sand and seaweed. Maybe if she cleaned it out, she could get it started. The seaweed came out easily, but every time she disconnected something, sand and salt water poured out. She would have to take the whole thing apart to clean it. She was about to give up when an idea struck her. "Wilson, can you take a picture every time I disconnect something?" "Of course," Wilson said as Sasha began the teardown. A few miles inland, the intense hike had not only stopped Caleb from shivering, he was actually starting to sweat. "Which way now?" Caleb asked as he came to a rock outcropping that blocked his path forward. "East," Wilson said. Caleb had gone no more than 10 steps when a howl suddenly filled the air. "You said watch out for bears," Caleb hissed. "We also have wolves," Wilson replied calmly. "If we get out of this alive, I'm going to delete you so fast," Caleb said as he slowly pushed onward. "Once we fix the satellite, then you can do as you wish," Wilson replied. Caleb saw movement out of the corner of his eye and spun around. It was a mountain goat, who looked just as terrified as Caleb. For a brief moment, they studied each other, trying to guess which one the wolves were after. Caleb stood his ground, and the goat took off through the forest. Seconds later, the branches around Caleb shook, and he caught a glimpse of silver fur as the wolves raced past him after the mountain goat. Everything went quiet, and Caleb breathed a sigh of relief. "Stay alert," Wilson reminded him. "We also have bears on the island." Back at the boat, Sasha replaced the plastic cover of the motor. "Here goes nothing," she muttered to herself, and grabbed the pull cord. This time, at least the cord moved, but no matter how hard she pulled, the motor refused to turn over. Sasha cursed herself for spending so much time fiddling with it. "How long until Caleb gets back?" Sasha asked Wilson. "It is difficult to estimate. particularly in his condition. You need to focus on yourself. That is the best way to increase your odds of survival. Sasha tried not to let Wilson's words get to her, but she knew he was right. She had been nervous about going on the boat with Caleb. If she had listened to her gut, she might not be in this mess. Then again, Caleb probably wouldn't have survived the night. "He'll be fine," Sasha said, trying to convince herself. "Worry about your own safety. You need to be prepared to leave as soon as the boat is ready, whether Caleb is back or not." For some reason, this wasn't making Sasha feel much better, so she turned her attention back to the task at hand. Sasha ran into the woods and found a trunk that was covered in sap where a branch had broken off. It had turned into hard resin, but she was able to hammer off chunks and place them in the toolbox. It didn't take long to get the fire going again, and she placed the toolbox with the resin on top of the flames. Caleb was exhausted by the time he reached the communication facility, a small metal shed surrounding the base of a massive satellite dish at least 20 feet across. The top of the shed was littered with several smaller dishes, like he had seen on the cameras at the beach. At quick glance, there didn't seem to be any damage. Caleb's grandpa lived on a farm and had a satellite dish about the size of a pizza. "Why is it so big?" Caleb asked. C-band communications require much more power and are less affected by the significant amounts of precipitation the island receives. Also, in the event of an eruption, the stronger signal should be able to pass through the ash cloud. The door was unlocked. Inside were racks of equipment and a single workstation. Caleb found the diagnostics program. Everything checked out okay, except for a single error. Uplink disconnected. "There's the problem," Wilson said, indicating a single Ethernet cable that had unplugged from a switch. "Just reconnect that to port 17. "I thought you said it was damaged in the storm," Caleb said. "I suppose one of the pre-eruption earthquakes could have shaken it loose," Wilson offered. Caleb took a closer look. The clip was intact. There was no way that came out on its own. However, the thing that made him suspicious was the strange red color. Caleb held it up to the light. It was covered in blood. "Whose blood is that?" Caleb demanded. "That is irrelevant. Just plug the cable into port 17. "Whose blood?" Caleb shouted again. "Edward's," Wilson replied coldly. Back at the boat, Sasha used a cloth to apply the hot pine sap to the hull and stood back to admire her handiwork. It was amazing how well this stuff worked. She had managed to repair all of the cracks, and the first few had already dried hard enough that she was confident it would hold. "I think we should..." Sasha's thought was interrupted by a sudden blast that knocked her off her feet and sent her tumbling across the ground. Her ears rang, and she could feel her heart racing. "What was that?" Before Wilson could respond, Sasha knew the answer. A massive cloud of smoke was rising from the mountain. The volcano was erupting.